Hey Phil, this is Cameron.
Hey, what's up, Cam?
Man, I gotta talk to you about something. Have you been watching the news?
Dude, what is going on? Pocket politics with Phill and Cam. Why? Why are we doing this?
I think it's gonna matter.
The only thing they want to talk about is guns and abortion.
My own views, I want to see the Republicans get away from the social issues.
I'm not saying that Republicans are idiots.
You hear something like that, it's powerful.
As an American, I was disgusted.
You could make the argument that you're probably more in the middle as well.
I think that's just a story that somebody's telling you.
Again, well, with the facts, this is true. Everybody knows
What
it.
facts?
So-
What facts? Who does this hurt more, Republicans or Democrats?
Boy, I've been thinking about that.
Welcome back to Pocket Politics. Cam, how was your week?
Yeah, it was good. How about yours?
Yeah, pretty good. So, getting ready for the holiday times, a lot of shopping, a lot of stuff going on, but we don't want to talk about that. Let's get into the news from the week.
Yeah, we got a lot to talk about tonight. So the government is going to stay open at least for a little bit longer, and we're going to have some discussion on that. The president signed into law a marriage protection bill. There's also a little bit of drama surrounding that we'll touch on. Joe Manchin's permitting reform came up again and was defeated in the Senate. And of course, some Donald Trump news. He's now got trading cards on the market. There's also some polls that are out with Donald Trump talking about how he's not sitting so well in his quest for the White House. We're also going to talk a little bit about some opposition to him. We've got some news on the January 6th committee. We've got a rioter. Speaking of January 6th, a man named Doug Jensen who was sentenced this week. There's some interesting stuff to talk about there. We're also going to touch on Paul Whelan. A little bit of news with his family, speaking with the White House. And a little bit of economy news, of course, our parting shots, and we always delve into other little side avenues and projects here. So, Phil, why don't we get started with some government staying open news?
Yeah, so for the time being, the government's going to stay open until December 23rd. So for our listeners, this might have already gone by the time you finish this episode. Who knows? But basically, they're just getting a little bit more time to work on this omnibus spending bill and keeping the government open right before the holidays. What do you got?
Yeah, well, I mean, pretty much what you said right now. I mean, there's just a Band-Aid put on, like you said, getting us basically another week. As far as the omnibus itself goes, I don't know a lot about it. Everything seems to be kind of tight-lipped. I know from the Democratic side, you got Patrick Leahy working on it, and from the Republican side, Richard Shelby out of Alabama working on it. Mitch McConnell has told Shelby he wants him to try and get something done in this regard. McConnell has said if there's nothing in place by the 22nd of December, they're just going to push to do some kind of a stopgap that's going to get us to March, I think is what it is, and then they'll work on it next year. So there's some kind of pressure to get it done. Phil, you and I were discussing earlier, the Democrats have got some electoral reform going in there. I think we have heard there's some Ukraine funding going in there as well, but I think you would agree with me. They've been kind of tight-lipped, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, but I also think that some of it's being tight-lipped. Some of it's also just the fact that there's not much to talk about there. Most of this is really boring, just financial allocations for the next fiscal year to keep us funded through to October 1st of 2023. I mean, there's not a lot of news making when we talk about buying paper and the things that government does on a day-to-day basis that nobody talks about. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would agree. It's pretty mundane stuff that most people would find very boring. So you have a good point there.
Yeah, we know defense is wrapped up in this. We know the Department of the Interior, the Department of Homeland Security, all these different departments that the government basically just operates all the time anyway without anybody really thinking or knowing about it. That's all basically what this bill is. So this is everything from paying staffers to keeping national parks open. I mean, it's there's a lot of stuff in there that's mundane, and that's probably more why they're not talking about it as part of, as opposed to why they, or why or if they're being tight-lipped.
So Senate Republicans are working with it, or it appears they're working with it. As I said, McConnell's behind it. Over in the House, though, Kevin McCarthy and several other Republicans in the House are vocal against this. They don't want to see it funded, it being the government, funded all the way to October 1st of next year. They want to see more of a stopgap put into play. McCarthy's got a lot going on with that. And again, he's trying to rally support over there. He's also got the drama going on with trying to get Speaker of the House. Phill, I think you've got a couple takes on that, don't you?
Well, yeah. So before I get to the kind of the McCarthy deal, it's notable because we're coming up on this deadline where they're going to have to raise the debt ceiling for the country, and the last time they held this hostage, I don't know if you remember this, but it like lowered our credit rating as a country, and had like some kind of negative effects on the economy. But without getting into those details, that is looming anyway, and it is notable that it's not being added into this omnibus spending bill. I mean, there's been a lot of people who have talked about this is kind of arbitrary and doesn't really matter all that much. And then some people think it's really important. Other people are saying that this is only just a way for one party to hold leverage over the other. But it is notable that it's not being included. Now, as far as McCarthy goes, I mean, he's under a lot of pressure from the Freedom Caucus. For our listeners, that's the Lauren Boeberts, the Marjorie Taylor Greens, the Paul Gosars, those kind of people out there that are saying, look, your votes for Speaker of the House are limited on this, and if you do not stop this from happening, we're not going to give you our votes. So he may not be secure. Keep it in mind, I mean, the Freedom Caucus has more than 4 members, and that's what basically the amount of votes he needs.
Yeah, I think the Freedom Caucus is 39 members, I think. So, I mean, if they all get behind it. I did hear, though, that supposedly Marjorie Taylor Greene was behind him to be Speaker, but there's also some moderate Republicans that are trying to flex their muscles, as we kind of discussed a couple weeks ago, aren't they, Phill?
Yeah, so Don Bacon came out and made a statement that basically said, hey, if rather than you being held hostage by the Freedom Caucus, we will work across party lines to get a speaker that is more palatable to the majorities in both parties in the House. Which I think is awesome. I mean, he's just throwing it out there. I mean, this guy this week sponsored legislation alongside Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez surrounding Puerto Rico, and we're not going to delve too much into that, but it could have some very big implications in the future. This is an example. You've been talking about the Problem Solvers Caucus. This is an example of them doing really good work, and as far as I'm concerned, I'm all for it. Get stuff done, go in there, work on the things that affect people's lives, and keep progress coming, because that's really what we want from our elected officials at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, Don Bacon has said before, in terms of the Freedom Caucus and their hold over McCarthy, he has made statements where he said, hey, don't forget Kevin McCarthy, your Freedom Caucus, or the Freedom Caucus, rather, that might be 39 members, but the Main Street Republican Caucus, which is the more moderate Republican caucus in the House, that has 89 members. And he wanted to remind McCarthy of that as well, that, hey, there's definitely a lot more moderates running around than there are those on the far, far right in the House. So that we've talked about the Problem Solvers Caucus. At the end of the day, they are there to get things done from both sides of the aisle. Phill, I think you and I both appreciate what they're doing. I think the majority of Americans appreciate what they're doing, and I hope they keep pushing forward to get things done. And I think you agree with me on that.
Yeah, so I 100% agree with you. If McCarthy does not get it and this kind of work from Don Bacon works out, do we see Don Bacon as a potential Speaker of the House candidate or somebody else?
That's interesting. I think Don Bacon would make a good Speaker of the House. I don't know if he wants it, but actually, I think he's a guy that you'd probably see a lot of support in the House for, maybe not from the Freedom Caucus, but if a guy like Don Bacon were to be thrown out there, or, his name tossed in there for the Speaker, I mean, there is a guy who could get some moderate Democrats jumping over to support him, I suppose. I mean, There's Brian Fitzpatrick on that Problem Solvers Caucus from the Republicans. It, is another name that would be a moderate that people would probably get behind. I mean, isn't Andy Biggs kicking his name around too, Phil? Or wasn't he? Andy Biggs being out of Arizona and on the Freedom Caucus, is his name still floating around out there?
It is. I was hoping you were going to take the bait when I asked you the question and suggest that there's a possibility of having a moderate Democrat Speaker of the House under a Republican-controlled Congress. We talked about it before we started recording, but there has been some speculation, not really big speculation or anything worth that much, but who knows? I mean, is that a remote possibility of Don Bacon and the
Yeah, it's probably a stretch. I mean, I was just talking about Andy Biggs, on the far right, but I mean, if the problem solvers were to get in and you get a guy, I don't know, Josh Gottheimer on the Democrat side, I mean, that's somebody who's held in high regards by people like Bacon and others in the Problem Solvers Caucus. I mean, very far-fetched, I suppose. I mean, highly unlikely, but that's a name from the Democrats, a moderate one that, holds a lot of respect on both sides of the aisle. I even saw a thing out there that said Josh Gottheimer, I think, was ranked as more conservative than 32 Republicans in the House. Josh Gottheimer being a Democrat again, so kind of interesting how that all breaks down. But, there's a lot going into this whole speaker thing. At the end of it all, though, is McCarthy going to get it, Phil?
No.
Interesting. Okay.
And that's based on nothing, actually. Just what I would want to happen. I think there's a likely possibility. There's a weird dynamic there because the Freedom Caucus has made all these demands for him if they want his vote. And some of those demands basically include the fact that anytime he does something they don't like, they would call a vote for another speaker. And so he's basically going to be in a live job interview every single day of his speakership up until the next election. Which is kind of a crazy thing to think about when you really put that together, that the Freedom Caucus, these 50 some odd members are going to hold him hostage on a day-to-day basis in Congress. That's nuts.
Well, Jim Clyburn, Democratic representative from South Carolina, was on one of the Sunday talk shows 2 or 3 weekends back, and he said there's a path for McCarthy to get the speakership. In his eyes, he said the path would include him reaching out to Democrats. And Clyburn said he thought there was a number of Democrats that would support him for Speaker of the House if he were to come and sit down and just see if there was some ways they could maybe meet in the middle on some issues. And so Clyburn talked about that. Now, McCarthy has said he's not interested in getting support from Democrats for his speakership, that he's going to, or that he believes that they should do it just as a Republican Party. And I can understand that, but I mean, if he gets enough people pushing back against him from the Republicans, he may not have a choice but to reach across the aisle.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I mean, he definitely has a path. There are some serious hurdles in that same path to get through for him. So is he good enough to do it? I don't know. We're going to see the next couple of weeks what's going on. What else is going on in Congress this week? I mean, we've got a couple different things to talk about. So,
well, the marriage protection bill. Yeah, sorry, Phil. I was just going to say the marriage protection bill signed into law by the president, and we've talked about that over the last couple of weeks, and so we kind of hashed this out before, and you and I have talked about what that all entails. I think maybe the bigger news this week was the drama surrounding this whole bill, and by drama I mean Representative Vicky Hartzler from Missouri, well, I guess for lack of better words, crying on a video clip about how, in her words, she just thought this was a awful bill that discriminated against religions. But it seems like her nephew has some other thoughts.
Let's play the clip. We'll start with Representative Hartzler on the House floor.
Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you my priority. Protect religious liberty. Protect people of faith. And protect Americans who believe in the true meaning of marriage. I hope and pray that my colleagues will find the courage to join me in opposing this misguided and this dangerous bill. I yield back.
So that's definitely, I mean, you say drama surrounding the bill. I would say it's more drama surrounding her. But it turns out her, nephew who came out and had this to say.
Today, a United States Congresswoman, my Aunt Vicky, started crying because gay people like me can get married. So, despite coming out to my aunt this past February, I guess she's still just as much as a homophobe. It's more like you want the power to force your religious beliefs onto everyone else. And because you don't have that power, you feel like you're being silenced. But you're not. You're just gonna have to learn to coexist with all of us. And I'm sure it's not that hard.
Well, there you go. So, pretty entertaining, just seeing him kind of come back. What do you have on this one, Cam?
Well, so her nephew, Representative Hartzler's nephew, he's come out as being gay to his parents, I guess, as a young teenager, and there's been a lot he's dealt with between him and his parents, and they had him in conversion therapy for a while, and he said he's tried to be straight to please his parents, realized that's not who he was, took it off into college. He went to Oral Roberts. That's where his parents sent him, thinking that, it being a Christian college, that maybe that would help him. But since he's graduated college, he's become an LGBTQ activist. And so, I mean, you can see in the clip, he's talking about his aunt. I mean, he said as a kid he was close to her, but nowadays she doesn't really want anything to do with him. And so, yeah, I mean, I like I said, drama about the bill, but you're right, Phil. It was more drama surrounding Representative Hartzler and kind of her actions and then her nephew.
Yeah, not too many times do you see somebody crying on the House floor over people, being able to love the way they want and practice getting married. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say about this. It's just so ridiculous. Like,
I think the clips kind of say it all.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I mean, it's so ridiculous. And then, the next thing is this permitting bill. We've talked about this before. Joe Manchin really was trying to get this kind of permitting reform into law. And it looked like the Democrats were in full support of this thing. And Chuck Schumer had kind of, carried the rallying cry to get everybody involved. It's just not going anywhere. What's your take on this? You want to take a stab at it and then we'll discuss?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, Phil, I mean, you're right. This permitting reform, I mean, it comes about as part of that Manchin support in the Inflation Reduction Act. And I mean, I'll give Chuck Schumer credit. He told Manchin that he'd push for it, and he's been doing just that, and he's supported him with it. And as far as the permitting reform itself goes, I mean, we've hashed out the details before, but it's supposed to be, an easier path for permits for energy, certainly in the fossil fuels in the short term. And then long term, it was supposed to open up the avenue to faster permits for renewable energy. President Biden made a statement saying that he supported Manchin's permitting reform and that he encouraged all in the Senate to do the same. But at the end of the day, when this thing got voted on, it was a 47-47 vote. Only 7 Republicans joined Manchin on this. I think it was 10 Democrats jumped ship on him, mostly on the progressive wing. I'm personally disappointed. I think there was a lot of politics that were going into play here. I think Manchin was trying to do the right thing for the country, and politics came into play. I mean, Manchin himself said it. He said, once again, and these are Manchin's words, quote, "Once again, Mitch McConnell and Republican leadership have put their own political agenda above the needs of the American people," end quote, from Joe Manchin. So
he's 100% right, though, because, the thing is that the Republicans run historically on less bureaucracy and less government involvement and things like this. And this is a bill that actually does that. So this is a bill that largely the Democrats made, or some Democrats made a concession to allow this thing to go through based on him passing the bigger effort, which this bill will eventually help the bigger effort. And the Republicans, who constantly, vote and run on less government, less bureaucracy, getting things done quicker, voted this down. So He's right. Cam, you're right. I mean, this is kind of like, it does have some short-term negative implications if you're a big environmentalist. But other than that, in the long term, this is really going to help a lot of those things, in my view. I just think this this is a bill that should have probably passed 77.
Yeah,
With 77 votes in the Senate, not 40. You know what I mean? Not getting shot down with 47.
yeah. I was going to say this is Phil. You're right. This is a vote or a bill rather, that has Republican written all over it, and many Republicans have said in the past that they were looking for this permitting reform, and Manchin brings it out. However, there's a lot of folks on the other side of the aisle that were upset at Manchin for going into this Inflation Reduction Act, and it's a whole lot of drama going on now back and forth. But at the end of the day, this was Manchin again trying to get something out there that, like you said, Phil, should be pretty darn popular. And I'm surprised we don't have more people behind it. There was, as I said earlier, 7 Republicans. I mean, the moderates were all in there, the Mitt Romney, Murkowski, Collins, that whole group, a couple more, Rob Portman and Pat Toomey, they're retiring. So they're done here at the end of the year in the Senate. So they threw their vote in behind it. A couple others did also. But yeah, Manchin's saying that he's going to keep pushing on this, and supposedly it's going to come back sometime next year. I've heard it maybe back or brought back up again as early as January. We'll have to see. But I mean, Phil, is there any hope that Manchin gets this done in the next 6 months or so?
I mean, at the rate we're going, I would say no, but it blows my mind that okay, this is what kills me, is that if you are a pro fossil fuel state, which there are a lot out there, or if you are in a state that is affected by, say, drilling in the ocean, Louisiana, Mississippi, Florida, who else? I mean, that's
Alaska.
6 senators, right? Yeah, Alaska. Well, yeah,
Well,
and exactly. But Alaska did vote for it.
I was going to say both their senators did. So
Yeah.
Murkowski and
But
Dan
what I'm
Sullivan,
saying
so,
is,
yeah.
yeah, those Gulf Coast states, right? So it's like Texas, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, like Louisiana. That's enough votes to get this thing passed, and it is in their best interest to do this. I can't wrap my head around why they would plant their foot with this one.
Well, it's politics. That seems to be what's going on. They're upset at Manchin, and now things are getting nasty. Manchin said it. This is getting really political, and so we'll have to see. I mean, I believe they are going to bring it back. I mean, they say they are, and I'm sure they'll try. I mean, this permitting reform, it seems like this is the thing that just doesn't go away. Manchin's going to try and get that attached to any bill that he can, I guess. But we'll see. I think it's a bill that should pass. We'll see if people can put the politics beside, or set the politics aside, and try and get something done on this going forward. But Phil, anything else on the permitting reform, or are you ready to transition to Mr. Trump?
Well, I mean, the only last thing I would say was it's a shame that we're not going to get to lump this into the omnibus that we talked about.
Yeah.
And I understand why. But it's I mean, this I'm just disappointed because this is something that could make everybody's, it's exactly what both parties want. It's like limit bureaucracy, get things done. I get it. It's not perfect in the short term, but we rarely get that from the government in the United States. So that's all I have for that.
Okay. Well, yeah, I agree with you on that. There was a lot of goodness there, but Mr. Trump is back in the news. So he's got a new trading card out there that sold like hotcakes the other day. Phil, what can you tell us about the Donald Trump trading cards?
Well, let me just preface this by him coming out midweek and saying that, tomorrow he's got a huge announcement. There was all kinds of speculation over this. You and I talked about it. Like, what could that possibly be? It seems way too early, but is this a VP candidate? I mean, is this a policy? Like, wait. Now, we know Trump's never really had many policies, but I mean, you and I talked about it at length. We could not figure out what this big announcement was. Turns out it was a limited edition NFT photoshopped pictures of him on top of like a cowboy's body and an astronaut's body and dressed up as a fighter pilot. I'm at a loss for words. I mean, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I'm with you. We were wondering midweek what this big announcement was. You're right. We were speculating on a VP candidate announcement. We were kicking around the idea of, is he going to announce he's coming back on Twitter? I mean, we had all kinds of ideas, but Phill, in our discussion, never once did either you or I mention a trading card. So
Yeah, and a digital trading card at that. It's not
Yeah.
even like an actual baseball card. Like you don't get a stick of gum because there's no package to unwrap.
yeah.
It's just literally a digital picture. Probably not in the long run worth the paper that it's not even printed on.
Well, they did come out on Thursday. 44,000 of them sold. They sold out actually. $99 a piece is what people were paying for these things. So there was some interest in them, Phill.
Yeah, I mean it shocks me, but it also shocks me that there's still interest in Donald Trump himself. I mean, but this is the world we live in. So what can I say? I mean, apparently there's people out there that want a collectible that they can't even touch.
Well, you mentioned interest in Trump. There obviously is interest in him because people are still buying, like you said, these NFTs and such. But there's been some polls come out lately that show he may not be as popular as he thought he was. And I don't know if you've seen these polls, Phill, but a Wall Street Journal poll was just out this week that has, in a hypothetical primary match now, Ron DeSantis at 52% to Donald Trump at 39%. And a USA Today Suffolk University poll released this week also has DeSantis up 56 to 33 on Trump. So maybe he isn't as popular as he thought he was.
Apparently, he's still popular enough to sell. What did you say? 44,000 of these, fake stamps.
Yeah, I mean,
Of him standing on the moon and I mean, it was like him dressed up as a football player on the 50-yard line. Like this, it's so ridiculous, and probably some of the best stuff is the people coming out bashing him for it. It's like he made this huge announcement, put everybody on needles and pins, and then this is what we get. Like it is yet probably another grift, and then a lot of people out there are looking at this. $99. There was a limit on how much you could buy per household, and that was 100. So first off, why would he put a limit on it? Well, then it turns out people are putting the pieces together, and anything over $10,000, you have to report the conditions of sale. So now people are starting to think this may be a crazy money laundering scheme. But I mean, without getting too far into this, it's just ridiculous.
Phill, you said who was speaking out against it. Steve Bannon spoke out against this. Steve Bannon said whoever on the Trump staff made this decision ought to be fired. Mike Flynn spoke out against it too and said whoever advised him on that, I'd fire him immediately. So,
well, the problem is that they say whoever on the Trump staff made that decision, it was Trump. It's just this crazy thing. How can I grift? How can I get more money from the American people? How can I get my supporters who probably don't even have it to spend in the first place? He's potentially got 44,000 people that are running around bitching about the price of groceries and then turn over and hand the dude $100 for nothing. It's just stupid.
Well, Phill, I want to go back to those polls though for a second that have him underwater right now. And I read off those numbers a little bit ago. Clearly, different polls are showing some slightly different numbers, but their message seems to be the same: that Donald Trump is losing support, and so he's irate on these polls. Okay, Donald Trump jumped on Truth Social and had this to say: great polling has just come out on me versus various others, including Biden, but I still have to put up with the same old stuff from the Wall Street Journal, which has lost an incalculable amount of influence over the years, and Fox News, whose polls on me have been seriously wrong from the day I came down the escalator in Trump Tower, end quote. So he's irate. Phill, I mean, is he going to continue to lose support? Is he still a big factor? I mean, what are your thoughts on this going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think he slowly over time will whittle away his own support, especially if guys like Steve Bannon out there or are out there talking about how this is a bad move. He will self-destruct, to some extent, and whittle away at his own support. Yeah, I just don't know. I mean, I could still see him actually upsetting the mold in the Republican primaries. I mean, I'm not. I think
Yeah.
that's totally still a possibility, and I think he does have enough support, even as he chips away at it. He does have enough support to do it.
Phil, I agree with you. He's going to be a force to be reckoned with in the primaries, I think, even though we are seeing early polls show him underwater. But I'll be honest with you, you should never leave Trump for dead because he seems to rise above it all. But again, he continues to take bashing from prominent Republicans. This past weekend, we saw Chris Christie, amongst others, come out very vocal on him. We've got some footage here, a clip rather, of Chris Christie talking about Donald Trump. Why don't we go ahead and play that?
Good candidates have a chance to win. And Herschel Walker is not a good candidate. And, he wasn't a good candidate because of a whole variety of issues that we saw that came out during the campaign. Let's remember a few things. Brian Kemp had 200,000 votes more than Herschel Walker on election night. If you're Herschel Walker and you don't win that night, you're not winning. And on the Donald Trump side, we all remember in 2016, he said if he got elected, there's going to be so much winning and winning and winning and winning that he gets sick of winning. None of us knew at the time he was actually talking about the Democrats. We're going to do all that winning, not the Republicans. And that's what he's wrought. And Herschel Walker is his creation. And so he's got to own the fact that Herschel Walker so vastly underperformed in a state as we saw earlier. Every other Republican running statewide won, except for Herschel Walker. You know what that tells you? Bad candidate.
Well, there you have it.
Yeah, exactly. That's a lot of what we've been hearing post the runoff in Georgia. But even more, I mean, he just straight up says it. Trump's a loser. But more importantly, is this a signal that Chris Christie is trying to do something more than talk about it on news? What do you think?
That's a good question. I have heard some rumors out there that Chris Christie may be looking at a run in 2024. I think he would be an interesting candidate, and I'll be honest with you. I think if Christie did decide to get in the race, he could win nationally. The problem Chris Christie's going to have would be, can he win the primary? And I don't see him winning the Republican primary to even be able to go on to take on a Democrat, be it Joe Biden or whomever. And like I said, I think if he was to get through a primary, I think he'd be a formidable candidate. But I don't know that he gets through the primary. I mean, Phil, do you think Chris Christie's going to run?
So, one, I don't know if he's going to run, but I will say this, is that if you look at, Chris Christie's last chance to, be at the head of a government, he was governor of New Jersey. He, at one point, fairly early on, he had approval ratings that were in the 70s. And so I think this guy, again, to echo your kind of take on this, is that he has the hardest battle he's going to fight is in the primaries. But if he were to make it through, he stands a pretty good chance. He's a good speaker. He was actually, I think, a pretty good attorney. And so there are certain things that he does really well, and I think that could make a difference. Now, if he makes it through that primary, or if he were to run and go on and make it through the primary, do I think he has a good chance of being elected? I think he has an okay chance. Do I think he has a good chance of being elected twice? No. And I'll tell you why, is because he has already done this in New Jersey, right? He was immensely popular, and then he slowly burnt himself down and collapsed everything. I mean, it was just scandals. There were bills that were hugely unpopular once they rolled out and people actually saw the consequences, right? There was a lot of stuff done in education, environmental stuff that people didn't like. And like I said, I mean, he came out early on with a 70+% approval rating that whittled itself down to the low 30s by the time he decided to run for president in 2012, right?
Yeah, 2012, which I will add, Phil, 70% approval rating for a Republican in New Jersey is pretty impressive. But as you mentioned, it whittled away as the years went by. So,
Yeah, it was early on, and then just kind of nosedive all the way down.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, no, interesting, and that's why I just made the comment that him being elected in a blue state as a Republican and then having that high approval rating says something. But as you mentioned, he had his difficulties as a governor. I mean, I think he's an interesting candidate, and that I think he's a stark contrast to Trump. I mean, he's looks like he's willing to take on the former president. So I guess we'll see as time goes on. But I don't actually see him running for president. I kind of see him as that kind of like that football coach who's no longer coaching, who now has a job in the announcer's booth or sitting there on a pregame, NFL show where they sit and talk football. But at the end of the day, they're not really accountable to anyone. They're not accountable to their general manager and their players and the fans and all that, because all they're doing is commenting on TV. And that's kind of what Chris Christie's doing now. I mean, he's got himself a pretty good gig going there on ABC News, and I just think he's kind of comfortable with that, and I think he's found his little niche.
so just to be clear, Chris Christie is the Terry Bradshaw of politics.
I guess that's what I've set him up to be there, I guess. But that's my take on him, though. I don't think he's going to run.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I'll just reiterate. I mean, I think I don't know if he runs or not. If he does, I think his biggest hurdle is the primary. And like I said, if he were to make it through the primary, he gets elected once, but can't get elected twice.
Okay.
And that's not even a definite he gets elected once. It's just he has a chance to. Against President Biden, I think he absolutely has a chance. But at this point, there's a lot of people who have a chance running against President Biden. And we can talk more about that later. Did you hear the January 6th committee news this week?
Yeah, I did. Looks like they got another hearing coming up on Monday, and they're going to announce, looks like take a vote rather on some criminal referrals. I'm hearing at least 3 of them.
Yeah, so if we have to ask who that is, who do you think we get criminal referrals for?
I mean, I'm assuming Trump, given that they've been gathering all this stuff up. But there's also some rumors about some other associates, if you will. I think they've even talked about possibly some criminal referrals against some House members that refuse to cooperate with them.
Yeah, so I think Mark Meadows also definitely gets a criminal referral. I think the former president, the former president's chief of staff are in there. The third one, I'm not too sure about. I mean, I don't know if we get the My Pillow guy. It doesn't seem to me like Congress is interested in going that route. They're probably going to pick somebody who is an official, who is associated with the president in an official capacity. But yeah, you say at least 3, so that leaves us one name that we haven't mentioned. Outside of Donald Trump and Mark Meadows.
Well, again, I read that there was a possibility of some other House members. They had, again, pure speculation. I'm not trying to suggest these people will have a criminal referral, but I saw McCarthy's name on there and a couple of other House Republicans that hadn't cooperated with the January 6th committee. So again, it could be any number of things, but I guess we'll see Monday. So they're going to be back. Phill, is that a primetime thing, do you know, or how's that going to go down?
I don't believe it's a primetime thing, but I don't want to be quoted on that. I think it's going to be a midday. I was going to ask you, do we get the report on Monday too? Or are we waiting till like next Friday for that? I mean, I hate to see this thing come out right as we're about to take a break for the holidays and not be able to talk about it immediately. But maybe it's a good thing because it gives us time to actually go through and read it. I don't know if you've ever read any of these reports before, but these like kind of congressional hearings, I mean, they're like thousands of pages, and it's basically like um, undertaking the most boring novel on the planet. I mean, I remember reading about 2/3 of the September 11th committee report, and just kind of tapping out, after 800 pages or whatever it was that I read.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's plenty there's plenty in those. We'll have to see when this report hits. I mean, I would think they'd bring it Monday. I mean, this is it. They're saying this is their final thing. So I would think they'd bring it Monday, but maybe they'll drag it out to Friday. I don't know. We'll see what they got.
What?
I mean,
The only reason I say that is because I think so they're going to have a largely ceremonial vote on Monday, right, in this hearing where they vote on the criminal referrals to the DOJ, and so we know how this is going to play out. They're gonna show us some evidence. They're gonna make a couple speeches. They're gonna hold a vote, and in every vote they're gonna hold, it's gonna be every single one of them are yays and zero nays, right? Like we just know that's coming. I doubt them to hold a vote on something that like all of a sudden Adam Kinzinger raises his hand as like, nope, I don't agree with the rest of the committee, right? They wouldn't be doing that, especially on TV. We're gonna get those referrals. And then I think for them, they're going to put that as like kind of the last page of the report. And that's why it may take time. It may take a couple days for us to get the final report because the results of those votes and the final bit of stuff that they show on that hearing are going to be in there.
okay. Yeah. I mean, I guess we'll find out this week. Speaking of January 6th, though, there's more in the news on January 6th. Phill, have you heard about this rioter, Doug Jensen?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about him before, right? I mean, this is the guy that thought he was invading the White House, right?
Yeah.
and entering the White House. Apparently, he doesn't know his Washington D.C. architecture all that well. Um, yeah, I don't know. So he got sentenced to 5 years. Dude's going to jail, of course. This was the guy that chased it's like the famous footage of the rioters chasing the police officer up the stairs, and the police officer kind of leading them in the wrong direction so they didn't get too close to congressional members. This was the guy at the head of that, and he has now been convicted and sentenced to 5 years. So good for him.
Yeah, he was also one of the first 10 rioters to actually breach the Capitol. So he was in that very, very first wave to go in there. Of course, he's now running around saying, I just want to go back and be this great family man and the great citizen that I've always been. Apparently the judge wasn't having that, though, because as you said, Phill, this guy's getting 5 years. Maybe while he's sitting in jail, he can learn the map better of Washington, D.C., shall we say. So he kind of now better understands where and what the White House is and where and what the Capitol is. Do you think he'll maybe learn that?
Well, I wonder about him going back to being such a great citizen with no understanding of citizenship, right? Like
Yeah.
he obviously doesn't know how the government works if he thinks he's overturning an election by invading the White House. I mean, it's just layers on layers of this is essentially the Dunning-Kruger effect at its best, right? I mean, he's too dumb to know what he doesn't know. So, yeah, I don't know. Maybe he was a great family man. Good for him. Should have stayed home on January 6th.
Yeah, should have stayed back there in Iowa, I guess. But you know what? He's got a lot of time to think about it because, as you said, Phill, he's got 5 years in prison now. Again, as we keep seeing more and more of these January 6th convictions play out, I'm sure he is not going to be the last man to get sentenced with all that. Shifting gears a little bit away from January 6th, we'll go back into the news or kind of tap back into something we were talking about last week, and that is people being held captive overseas in nations. And in this case, we'll touch just a little bit on Paul Whelan again. Looks like this past week.
Real quick, before you dig too into it, I do want to talk about, you and I had some discussion this week that we're potentially going to queue up a special episode, or at least try and put something together, because you and I both think this is really critical to talk about all the Americans that are detained, whether lawfully or unlawfully overseas. This brings back ideas of that guy that was captured by the Taliban for that had basically deserted. So just so that our listeners know, it's not going to be in the short term in the next couple of weeks, but we are potentially working on an effort to talk way more about that issue. Sorry for the interruption, but back to Paul Whelan.
Yeah.
Cam.
Well, no, I'm glad you brought it. It's important. I mean, you and I have talked about, and I think we both have done a little bit of reading on this and realized that, hey, there are plenty of Americans being held overseas, and it would be nice to see them come home. And in the case of Paul Whelan, his family this past week, I had a chance to meet with some White House and State Department officials. Sounds like they had a virtual meeting, but nevertheless, they had a meeting with some of Whelan's family. White House is saying, hey, we haven't forgotten this man. We are pushing forward to try and get him home. Again, as you said, Phill, several others held overseas. And I think at the end of the day, it's good to see the government reaching out to these families and saying, we haven't forgotten about your loved ones. I'm hoping we can get these people home.
Yeah, and sometimes this is foreign policy at its realest and hardest moments, right? This is stuff that happens in multiple other countries. It even kind of hits home. I remember seeing a documentary about a climber that I was a big fan of that had basically been detained by terrorists, while he was out there, hiking and climbing mountains, and then you've got those people that are just going somewhere as a tourist and taking pictures of iconic, scenes and places and things that they just wanted to experience, and they get wrapped up for, spying or whatever the charge is. And this happens all over the world. And so it's something definitely to highlight in a future discussion. But hopefully, I think you and I are both, regardless of what you think of the character of any of these people, in a country like Russia, they are most likely probably innocent. I don't know all the details, and none of us will ever find out all the details, but I would say that Russia doesn't exactly have the best record on this. So hopefully Paul Whelan and others come home soon.
Yep, definitely. I agree with you. And like I said, look for in the future sometime us to put together this special episode, if you will, about these various Americans that are held overseas. So yeah, definitely continuing to keep this stuff in the news as much as we can. We're putting stuff on Facebook about it too, so these people aren't forgotten over there. But
speaking of Facebook and talking about special episodes and stuff, I wanted to let everybody know that, we are going to take the next 2 Saturdays off from recording episodes of Pocket Politics. We don't think there will be too much in the federal government on Christmas and New Year's, so we're going to take those off. But for our listeners, we're going to drop 2 special episodes. We're going to highlight a couple of different presidents and kind of what they did and why their impact was so influential for the country, and how those 2 presidents led us to where we are now. So we do have 2 special episodes. That way you're not missing anything, and you don't have to wake up on a Sunday morning or go to work on your commute on Monday and not have our voices in your ear. So we do have that coming up. Also, check us out on Facebook. Go to our website, pocketpolitics.co. You can link to all our social medias. We've got Facebook. We've got Instagram. You can listen to us on Spotify, everywhere else you get podcasts. And you can even watch a video of a still screen of our logo on YouTube and listen to our podcast there. So please do check us out, engage with us. Anything you want us to talk about, we will gladly address in the podcast. Kim, anything on that?
oh no, I'm with you. Just keep supporting us.
Absolutely. Now, big economic news this week. So a couple of big numbers, a little bit of controversy. Don't know if it's the progress we wanted, but we're moving in the right direction. Year over year, inflation appears to be down from in the 9s to about 7.2%. Again, not as good as we all want it, but a move in the right direction. It's also a little bit deceptive. So when you say year over year or month over month inflation, um, basically that is a measure on previous years and previous months. And so when you break it down, the CPI, which for our listeners is the Consumer Price Index, which comes out monthly and tells you the average price of every major consumer good all over the country. What we're seeing now is that 2 months in a row now, from September to October and October to November, we have a 0.1% rise in all prices. So inflation is definitely slowing. Jay Powell at the Fed came out and said he is going to slow the interest rate increase. Again, not the greatest news, but a sign that we are headed in the right direction. And the jobs numbers. I know, Cam, you have some points you wanted to talk about on this, and I think I can as well. They came in 236,000, I think, new jobs. While that sounds good and the current administration wants to jump on this and make this newsworthy, it is not quite the indicator that anybody wants or was hoping for. But what do you have for this one?
Well, as far as the jobs numbers you mentioned, Phil, so basically job numbers are climbing back towards what they were pre-pandemic, and you kind of touched on it. I mean, it may sound good or sound like a good talking point, but at the end of the day, we're still trying to get back to where we were pre-pandemic, or so it appears. That a lot of these new jobs are just jobs that are coming back from COVID, if you will, and it's always good to see jobs, or us rebuild, I guess, from, in this case, the pandemic, or, whatever happens. But at the end of the day, I don't think those job numbers are quite as good as maybe, some folks out of the White House would want us to believe.
They're not. And, can I mention that while we have really good numbers as far as adding jobs to the economy and getting people employed, there are really kind of opposite or negative numbers about the amount of jobs that are still not filled. And so that's kind of one of those things. It's like, yeah, we're adding a lot of jobs, but we're still not getting the workforce that we need engaged in the economy. So I think you're exactly right, Cam.
Yeah. And I mean, we'll see how this goes continuing in. I mean, gas prices are coming down a little bit again. I mean, we'd seen them come down kind of through the summer. Then they kind of spiked again a little bit in the fall. Now they look like they're coming back down again. National average is down. So we'll have to see. Biden's still fighting approval numbers, that are kind of low. I've seen him vary, from as low as one poll I think I saw had him at 39%. I've seen others at 40 and 41. Phil, I think you said you saw one at 43, but I know he's trying to fight, some of these different economic issues, and in the hopes that he can get his approval numbers up. Still talking to people, watching the news, there are still a lot of people that are feeling the effects of inflation and COVID and all these kind of things. And so I know there's a lot of Americans out there that are looking for relief in some way. So we'll have to see where this goes in the coming months.
Yeah, but don't worry about the people that are out there still seeking relief and not having the cash to spend, because there are still commercials that are going to be airing convincing you that you can afford to buy somebody a car for Christmas. So we still have that. No, I will say you're exactly right. I mean, we can see that people's pockets are hurting by the retail sales numbers. And so for those of you that don't know, we've probably mentioned it before, but I'm a big economics nerd. I dig really heavily into this stuff. And while I think this is good news, we are moving in the right direction, but we are nowhere there yet. And you can see that as signaled by what a lot of people would say, hey, this is really good economic news and we are fully back and fully recovering. And then the Fed still raises the interest rate. I think that should be an indicator that everybody takes away.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, Phil. Anything else you want to talk about on the economy, or?
No, I think that's about it. Moving on to parting shots. I know, I think you went first the last couple of weeks, so I'll take it today. I think your and my both, our favorites, old Marjorie Three Names was at it again this week. She spoke at a Young Republicans conference in New York. She said this week that if she had planned the insurrection, or if her and Steve Bannon had done it, people would have definitely been armed and they definitely would have won. So she caught that some news for that and caught some flack. Almost nobody's really talking about this in the House or the Senate. I mean, the White House released a statement, which is kind of what you expect. But yeah, she's at it full crazy again. And then this morning, Cam, I thought you'd like this. She was posting pictures from Walmarts in Georgia of sex toys being sold on the shelf next to kids' toothbrushes, and there was clear outrage. I thought it was kind of funny, but also like kind of weird. I mean, I don't go to Walmart a lot, but I don't think I've ever patrolled the dildo slash kids toothbrush aisle, so maybe that's why I haven't seen that myself.
Yeah, wow, lot to digest there on your parting shot, Phil. Yeah, well, I guess it's time for mine, and that's going to be a tough one to top. But I'm just gonna go to the Minnesota Vikings on mine. And let me just say, I hate to do this because it seems like in the past when I've brought up sports teams for my parting shot, it's like a curse against them. But I will just say earlier today, the Minnesota Vikings taking on the Indianapolis Colts. Vikings were down 33-0 at halftime. And they came back and won this game 39-36 in overtime. Just an incredible comeback. Basically, the first half was all Colts. Second half was all Vikings. And then we've got that thrilling overtime finish. And by the way, the overtime went right to the bitter end, too, when the Vikings finally kicked the field goal. So even the overtime was exciting. It was quite the game. Vikings with a huge comeback. And they ended up with this win today, clinching the NFC North title. So nice job, Vikings. Even though I would have liked to have seen you come out and handle the losing team Colts. I think their record was like 4-8-1 coming into today. I would have rather seen them come out and just dominate them. But at the end of the day, they got a win in quite a thrilling fashion. So nice job there. And speaking of nice jobs, I think we did a nice job on this episode, and this about wraps us up. Phil, do you have anything else before we sign off?
I think that's it. Before our listeners are probably going to hear this episode, we will know the outcome of the World Cup. Hopefully it's Argentina. I want to see the GOAT in world soccer win the one trophy that he hasn't been able to. That being said, anything else, Cam?
No, that's it.
All right. Well, everybody have a good week. Don't forget to go to pocketpolitics.co. That'll link you up to our social media pages. And that's all we have for this week. Thanks for tuning in.
All right. Until next time.
Bye.